Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to yet another episode of the Free Press Live. I am your host, Michael Moynihan, and alongside me, my trusty co-host, Batya Ungar-Sargon, who I say opinion editor of Newsweek and all that stuff, but I should just say co-host of the Free Press Live.
It's great to
Is
be
that
here
is
with
that
you,
great?
Michael.
Yeah.
That is
So
correct.
we have a very good show today, one I'm very excited about. Starting us off, after we talk for a little bit, we have the boss.
We do.
Der Chef, as they say in German. Not Bruce Springsteen, but Barry Weiss, who is going to talk to us about a scoop in the Free Press yesterday surrounding an interview on CBS by Tony DeCouple with Ta-Nehisi Coates, and this caused some internal tumult. And guess what? The Free Press got the audio, and you can listen to it there. What else we got going on? We have Haviv Reddick Gore. And if you don't know that name, you are impoverished by it, because since October 7th, I have been listening to the Israeli journalist Haviv Reddick Gore before anyone. He's joining us from Jerusalem. Yes, he's coming from Jerusalem to talk to us about Israel a year after October 7th. And then finally, keeping in mind there's a lot of stuff weaved in. So the finally is just the final guest, our very own Joe Nocera, one of the greats of his time, talking about a very interesting story that he wrote about FEMA response, Elon Musk. We're going to get deep into it. It's going to be a lot of Elon talk, a lot of FEMA stuff, maybe talk about some conspiracy theories that are going around.
Why not?
But Batya, why don't we start with Kamala Harris,
Yes.
who has been doing something of a media blitz, if you consider the word blitz to mean going on a whole bunch of very friendly podcasts, with the exception of 60 Minutes, which was actually a decent interview. But what are we looking at, Batya?
Yeah, so on Sunday, Kamala Harris's interview with the Call Her Daddy podcast dropped. Now, Harris rarely does long-form interviews, which prompted the host of this show, Alex Cooper, to ask why she decided to appear on Call Her Daddy.
I know.
Let's take a look at
I know the answer to this question.
Let's see how Vice President Harris answered the question.
I'm curious, you don't do too many long-form interviews. What made you want to do Call Her Daddy today?
Well, I think you and your listeners have really got this thing right, which is one of the best ways to communicate with people is to be real, and to talk about the things that people really care about. What I love about what you do is that your voice in your show is really about your listeners. And I think especially now, this is a moment in the country and in life where people really want to know they're seen and heard, and that they're part of a community, that they're not out there alone. And so I'm really glad to be with you.
Much of the conversation was focused on women's issues, or what passes for women's issues, in this conversation, specifically abortion. Here's one moment from the interview to give you a sense of how things went.
A bunch of these guys up in these state capitals are writing these decisions because they somehow have decided that they're in a better position to tell you what's in your best interest than you are to know what's in your own best interest. It's outrageous.
It's outrageous. Daddy gang, to put it in our TikTok terms. I have seen girls on the street walk up to men and be
What's a daddy gang?
do you know where a tampon goes? Do you know how many tampons we use? Do you even know how, do you know what a X or Y or Z is of a part of our, and they don't know the answer.
I was the first vice president or president to ever
And men don't know where
in office
parts are.
go to
Oh,
a
I do.
reproductive health care clinic, ever.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that, but I guess that makes sense.
To your point.
To your point.
To your point.
Okay.
Yes.
Michael, let me tell you why I found this interview so frustrating, that I'm very curious, as a man,
Yes.
your take on this. It seems to me like there's this sort of fantasy that gets perpetuated by often very privileged women, that women are somehow still oppressed in this country, when the truth is the exact opposite. The life expectancy gap is growing between men and women.
Yeah, you're beating us.
Women are now 15 points more likely to have a college degree,
Correct.
which, as we know, is one of the
Yes.
main predictors for access to home ownership and the American dream. Men represent 3/4 of the deaths of despair, obviously, which is accounted for in that plummeting life expectancy, specifically for men without a college degree. And what you have is women who are like the least likely to need an abortion. We know that most of the women who get abortions are women who, have a child, are poor, are not married, and don't have a college degree. But what you often have is these women who are quite well off, college educated, married or single, but definitely not mothers, the kind of people who would never need an abortion, and yet this is their number one issue.
Correct.
And I think that those two things are related, the sort of fantasy that women are still oppressed, and then all of the women least likely to need an abortion making it their number one issue,
Yeah.
which is kind of mysterious if you think about it, because all of those women actually do have very pressing issues related to the economy, related to immigration, related to crime and safety, but they pick the thing that they're least likely to actually need. And I think it's related to this, what I call oppression envy that afflicts the upper classes, which is they want to see themselves as virtuous, but in the left's model today, virtue and oppression are one and the same thing, and so they have to come up with ways in which to see themselves as oppressed. That's my take on it. What do you think?
I think at the beginning there, you just declared, Batya, a war on women. And I want to join this because I think us men are losing and we have to fight a rearguard battle against women who are doing better than us. No, I mean, I think the abortion issue, which is, if that was polling, internal polling, external polling, 10th in these issues, they would never talk about it. This is number one for them. So in this scenario, they're just going to have these vapid conversations. It really frustrates me. I mean, it doesn't make a difference what I think about these things. I have been pro-choice, to use the language, for as long as I can remember. I remain so. But, I just think these are useless conversations when somebody is saying, like, well, do men even know? That's not, to somebody who's opposed to abortion, it's not about your body. It's about the fetus's body, right? So this is these are not real conversations. They're just fake conversations that are filling up air and saying, we are good on this issue, vote for us. The second thing about that kind of drives me crazy is the humorous nature of why did you pick this podcast. The interesting thing about that is it doesn't matter the question, right? I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump, and I'm quite open about that. Never have, and never will.
Well, we'll see about that. We still have a few
We'll see about
weeks.
that. But the frustrating thing is to have another candidate in which every time there's an answer, I don't care the question. I don't give a shit. Sorry, we can say that. I don't care that it's why did you come onto this podcast? Because watch the answer again. It is the mind which just fills the air with nonsense of saying, well, I think that this show is about the listeners. What do you think that we're doing? You think that we're doing this for us? I mean, what does that even mean? So you go on from that to the CBS interview, the 60 Minutes interview, which was very useful.
Shockingly.
And I gotta say,
substantive.
I'm seeing these tweets last night, more useless Kamala Harris, Tim Waltz softballs, because Tim Waltz goes on to Jimmy Kimmel, and Jimmy Kimmel was like, why are you the best person that's ever lived and not the greatest person? It's so bizarre. But the 60 Minutes, two things about that very quickly. Bill Whitaker, was that who it is? Can we get a fact check on that? Absolutely phenomenal. Give that man a raise.
He was great.
How do we not know more about him? How is he not getting more 60-minute segments? That was a good interview. It wasn't showy. It wasn't about him. He was just saying, Madam Vice President, I asked you this question. The answer on Iran, which they cut out, was mystifying, but there was a couple others which were just these stews of words that made no sense and didn't answer very basic questions. And I find it very frustrating. I just find it frustrating, answer the damn question. You are applying for the biggest, most powerful job in the world, and you cannot answer direct questions. What is the problem?
I think, to me, what's even more shocking is that Harris has this almost she herself seems surprised that she's supposed to be able to answer the questions. And I think it's because she correctly understands that she's not meant to be herself a figurehead. She is meant to reflect a team behind her who are telling her what to say and how to answer these questions. Her job is to memorize what they told her to say.
And it's very obvious.
And
right?
it's very obvious, but I think it's almost like she herself has understood her assignment, right?
Yeah.
She does not seem at all embarrassed that for so long her team was keeping her from doing interviews on the assumption that she would not be able to handle them, right? Because she has correctly understood that it is not meant to be about her. It's meant to be about this sort of permanent bureaucratic class of Democratic operatives. And of course, we all know what they do when they have a very weak president like Joe Biden at the helm. They open the border, Alejandro Mayorkas. They make a mess in the Middle East, Tony Blinken, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, it's funny because I'm somebody who rarely gives Donald Trump credit for anything beyond being quite funny. The one thing in this context that I'll give him credit for is I don't typically like his answers, but there's a bluntness to, he doesn't avoid questions. One thing you can say about Donald Trump is like, what are you going to do on this issue? Unfortunately for America, he sometimes just makes it up on the fly and says, we're going to have a shutdown until we figure out what's happening. That was something that happened as a reaction to the crowd, basically. That wasn't like a policy position that they were putting out. So he's the exact opposite of this, where he's formulating policy on the fly. There was a question on the 60 Minutes interview, and it is the one that I have seen stump more Democratic candidates, and I would say to all of the journalists out there who were interviewing Democratic candidates, two examples. Last night, Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes. A couple years ago, Bill Maher asking the same question on his show of Bernie Sanders, who is not easily stumpable. He is a very good interview, regardless of what you think of his politics. The question was, how are you going to pay for it? I go and watch it. Just go and watch that clip, and in the comments on Twitter, tell us what you think of the answer, because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. When you see the policy, it's like, well, that's going to cost trillions of dollars. We are in a place now, the government spending is so outrageous that it doesn't mean anything anymore. You could make up a new number and it's like, yeah, we have a lot of big numbers.
And I just want to again contrast that, excuse me, very briefly with Donald Trump's plan. So the Harris plan requires how you're going to pay for that because it involves getting money and then redistributing it. It's that sort of redistribution model. But you look at Trump's model, it's not redistributionist, it is protectionist in nature. And so, and he wrote a great op-ed for us at Newsweek in which he laid this all out, in which he said, here is my economic plan. None of it involves giving people money. It all involves creating an economy that through the free market, through a little bit of help, protectionist help, does that work on its own.